Hey, welcome back everybody. This is Greg from Greg's Carport. This is our second video, and on this video what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be working on one of our daily drivers around here. It's a 2013 Nissan Versa. We're having problems with the brake lights. We have turn signals, we have backup lights, we have parking lights, but we don't seem to have brake lights. So it's probably either the bulbs or the switch that's located underneath the steering column has gone bad. What we're going to start with first is we're going to start with the brake lights, because the passenger side brake light has never been replaced. The driver's side has been replaced once. So there's a very good chance that these bulbs have just worn out. Even though the parking light works, the brake light won't, because it's a dual filament bulb. So if that second filament that the brake lights use have worn out, the parking lights would still work, but the brake lights would not. This is a 2013 Nissan Versa, which means it's a second generation Versa. They were produced from 2012 to 2019. In order to get to the brake lights or any of the lights, we have to actually get inside the housing, the taillight housing itself, in order to remove the bulbs. And in order to get to that, we have to get inside the trunk. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and get into the trunk. Now please excuse the fact that the trunk is dirty. It's an everyday driving car. We use it for almost everything we do around here. So let me show you inside the trunk. You don't have to have a whole bunch of fancy tools to do this job. I don't have a whole bunch of fancy tools at this point, so we're just going to use what we've got. This trim piece here sits on the lip of the trunk. As you can see over here, this part of the cover, the liner for the trunk, has been moved once before, where the passenger side is in better condition. Now on this bottom piece here, there are two tabs that are like this here. What these things do is they snap in and they hold these pieces of plastic in place, and these days all cars seem to be plastic. So there's two that go in here. One sets over here and one sets over here. Then you have another one that sits in here on the felt, and you can see over here on the passenger side that one is still in place. And then we have a second one that sits back here. You probably don't have to remove the second one, because once we move this lining out of the way, we'll have access to the lights right here. So as I originally told you before, we have these two tabs that are here. We have one that sits in this hole down here, and they push into place. You can push it into place to hold this trim piece in. And then the second one goes over here. So I've already removed these out of here. Now they actually make tools, trim tools, that will actually, they're shaped like a U, and they fit underneath that head, and you can just pry these out easily. If you don't have one of those, what I've done in the past is you can just use a screwdriver to start to pull it out. And then what you can always do is you can actually just use a small pair of scissors and go underneath the head like that, and then pull it up. Now if you use scissors, just be careful, because you don't want to put any holes in the fabric from where you pull that pin out. So once you get the pins out of this bottom trim piece down here, this simply just pulls up. It's underneath the carpet here that goes over the spare tire. So you just want to pull that up, and that pulls out of the way. And we can just set that aside there for now. Now what that does is it allows us more space to get to this carpet here. And as you can see where this pin fits in on that plastic, it also then goes through that carpet liner right there. Now when we pull this back out of the way, you might have to kind of crunch it. It all depends on, sometimes they move out of the way nice and easy, sometimes they do not. But once you get inside here, you're going to see that you have a nut down here and a nut at the top. Those are the only two nuts that actually hold the taillight housing in. There is a pin on the outside, which I'll show you once we start to take the light off. These are both 10 millimeter. So all you need to do for this is to go in and loosen them up. And then loosen the top. Once you get them loose, you should be able to turn these off by hand. Like this. Just make sure you hold on to these, because if we lose these, we're not going to be happy. Let's see if I get in there better so you can see that. So now we have both of the 10mm nuts off, here and here. Now if we take our hand and we push from the inside here out, that will help us loosen up the light. Once the light is loose, up here at the very front, there is a pin that holds the front of this light into the car. There is no nut on the other side of it, it's just a pin. So sometimes these pins are hard to get out, sometimes they snap out easily. If you have to pry this, be very careful. This plastic is brittle from the sun, and if you pry it, you could break the plastic. So if you have to pry it, put something underneath it, some foam, a little rag or something, and then just take your time. But once that's loose, this whole taillight section comes out. And what we see now is the area that we have to take off. The lights are inside this section right here. You can see there's 2 Phillips screws here and 2 Phillips screws there. Now we have to take those Phillips screws out in order to open up the light compartment. And I'll go ahead and get those Phillips screws out. So what we're going to do now, in order to make this a little bit easier to work on, is we're going to go ahead and disconnect the wiring harness from the light itself. You can do this simply with a small straight-edged screwdriver. And you're simply going to put the screwdriver in, and you'll notice there's a tab down there. So all you're going to simply do is lift up that tab. Once you lift up that tab, you can pull the connector off. Then the taillight is free from the car, and it'll be easier for us to work on. Now that we have the taillight assembly out of the side of the car, we can go ahead and work on those 4 screws that I told you about earlier. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. They're all a silver color, so they're easy to pick out. But anyway, you just want to go ahead and remove these 4 screws. At least loosen them up enough to where we can get the housing that holds the actual light bulbs in. And once we get these loosened up, we could go ahead and pull this part out, and you can see the lights that are inside. Now, as I've told you before, just make sure that you keep these screws, because if they get lost, we're going to have to somehow find some replacements. Now, before I do too much of this, we're going to look at how this lines up. So you can see that it sets on the car. I have it upside down. But you can see it sets on the car like this. So you have the turn signal, you have the backup light, and then you have the brake light. So we know that the brake light is this one up here. So when we take this out, you'll see that there's 3 bulbs. So back to this is the backup light, the amber turn signal, and then down here is our brake bulb. And that's the one we're going to go ahead and replace. So in order to replace this, you want to just gently push in and just barely turn counterclockwise, and the bulb will come out just like that. If we take a look at the bulb itself, just from looking at it to begin with, the bulb itself looks like the filaments are still in one piece. So the problem may actually be our brake switch after all. But since we're here, we're going to go ahead and replace these brake bulbs. It's up to you. Some people like to go ahead and also then replace the amber turn signal bulb and the backup bulb. That way when you do that now, you don't have to worry about doing it later. But since I'm kind of in a rush to get this car back on the road, today we're just going to concern ourselves with the brake light. So let me go get the new brake light bulbs and we'll move on to reinstalling it. Went ahead and I got the package of our new bulbs. Now this bulb that I think I told you earlier, this bulb is the original bulb that came out of the driver's side. This one has been replaced and it's a 7528. Just so happens the ones that I just purchased are that same number, 7528. These can be switched over to LEDs if you want. But for me, when it comes to a Nissan Versa, I'm just going to keep using these standard things. You know, it's not like it was an expensive car to begin with. So, although I must say it actually has been a good car. So, now what I want to explain to you also at this point while I'm getting these lights opened up is, and try to keep, believe it or not, it's not that difficult to get your new bulbs and your old bulbs mixed up. So make sure you keep your old bulbs off to one side and your new bulbs off to the other side. What I wanted to show you is, make sure you look down inside here to make sure that you're getting good contact inside there. And if we take out the old bulb, we can see that there doesn't appear to be any corrosion or anything, because that can actually lead to problems. What you could always do is you could always just use like a little file board that'll fit down there and just file those just ever so gently just to clean up those contacts. So we're going to go ahead and install the new bulb into the housing. You're going to notice on the housing that there's two different depths on the little parts that the lights fit. And if you actually look at the light, you have two pins on the light and one sets up higher than the other one does. So if you put this bulb in like this, the idea is to push it down to make contact inside the unit and then give it a twist clockwise this time. If it won't move, take the bulb out, spin those pins around, push down, and then turn it clockwise. And now you've got the bulb in there nice and tight like it should be. So at this point, take this, there's a little rubber gasket that fits in here. And it helps keep moisture out. And just go ahead and make sure that's in there nice and tight. And then you're just going to put the light assembly back into the housing like we took it out. And at this point, you're simply going to put those 4 screws back in. You'll bring it back over to the side of the car. You'll hook the wiring harness back in until it snaps into place. And once we get to that point, once we have it snapped back into place, I'll show you remounting the light on the side of the car. Now sometimes getting these screws back in, the ones that hold this housing inside the taillight assembly itself, sometimes these screws can actually be kind of a pain to try to balance them to get them into place, especially if you're like someone like me who's got some chubby fingers. But the best thing to do is just work them down there the best you can, get them started, and then you can come back with the screwdriver. Just make sure at this point that this housing is set down in there nice and snug. And then at that point, you can go ahead and get your screwdriver and simply tighten them up. And then you just do that to all 4. This one, number 2, number 3, and number 4. And then we'll go ahead and plug it back in. Now at this point, we have the screws back in, our 4 screws that we just tightened up. We have these 2, and then at the other end we have one here and one here. Now again, this is all plastic, and this plastic sets in the sun, it gets hot and everything else, and over the years it starts to get brittle. So you want to snug these up, but don't go overboard because you can actually end up breaking the plastic. At this point, we're going to go ahead and plug this light back in. So on the Versa, the orientation would be for, this is the side here. This is our electrical connector here that we're going to snap the wiring harness back into. So here's the wiring harness here. We're simply going to put the light here, and we're going to gently, we don't need to manhandle it, we're just going to gently slide that back into position until you hear it snap, just like that, and you know that it's tight, and you can just give it a little shake, a little tug to make sure. and then we're going to go ahead and show you how to put the light back on. So now that we have the wiring harness all connected, we're going to go ahead and put the tail light housing itself back onto the car. This here is the one where it has this little pop that pops into it right here. Then we have a hole here for this bolt, and there's a hole down there at the bottom for this bolt. And if we go back inside the car, you'll remember that's where we took those two 10mm off, up there and then down there. Now's a good time if you want to clean any gunk out of this area that's normally covered up by the light, like that. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and put this back in. So it pretty much sets in by itself. Just needs to be scooched around a little bit. But normally once you get the holes lined up, it'll pretty much start dropping into place. As you can see, we got the bottom one and the top one. Now the one we don't have is this little one that pops in here at the top. Let's back this up. Get that one. So what we did this is we just started that one first, and then we'll go ahead and get these 10mm in. Now you can see the top one's in. The tail light itself is tight. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take these two 10mm nuts, tighten those up. Now again, as I said with the other stuff, remember this is plastic, and so you don't want to over tighten these things. This one up here will work a lot better if you have a little extension you can use. But just get them snug like that. And then if we look back out here, we can see that the light's setting into place. We'll simply fold this lighter back in place, how it's supposed to set in, and then we have to simply put that, get in there, there it goes. Then we just take one of those little punch pieces and it punches back into place. And then you could go ahead and put this stuff here back underneath the weather stripping. There's another one down here, but that's part of that trim piece I told you that goes here. Otherwise, it's basically the same procedure for the passenger side. So anyway, so there you go. We went ahead and we got that brake light changed, the bulb, and we got that housing put back into place. I'm going to go ahead now and do the passenger side, which is the same as the driver's side, and then I'll get it all buttoned back up. I appreciate you watching. I hope that you subscribe, give us a like, hit the bell down there if you want, and you'll be notified the next time we put up a video. Thank you guys.